Carl Jung discovered something so disturbing about New Year resolutions that he warned his colleagues never to encourage patients to make them. In his clinical notes from 1928, he wrote that resolutions made by the conscious ego are not just ineffective, they're psychologically dangerous. They create what he called ego inflation, a state where the persona becomes so detached from the unconscious that transformation becomes impossible. And the most terrifying part? The harder you try to change through willpower alone, the more violently your shadow will sabotage you. Before we continue, I'm curious. Where are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments. It helps me understand this incredible community we're building. Jung believed that every failed resolution isn't just a moment of weakness. It's your unconscious mind waging psychological warfare against your persona. The person making the resolution isn't really you, it's the social mask you wear, desperately trying to force change on a psyche it doesn't understand and cannot control. Some people spend decades in this cycle, making and breaking the same promises year after year, never realizing they're fighting a battle they've already lost. Because what Jung discovered is that lasting transformation doesn't come from conscious intention. It comes from confronting the shadow you've been running from your entire life. In March of 1926, Jung documented the case of a 34-year-old businessman he would later reference in a seminar on analytical psychology. This patient, whom Jung called Herr M, arrived at his practice in Zurich carrying a leather journal filled with 5 years of failed New Year resolutions. Every January 1st, Herr M would write elaborate promises, exercise daily, stop drinking, improve his marriage, advance his career. By February, every resolution had collapsed. "I don't understand," Herr M told Jung during their first session. "I have the willpower, I have the discipline, but something inside me always destroys what I'm trying to build." Jung noticed something crucial in that moment. Herr M didn't say, "I destroy," he said, "Something inside me destroys." The patient had unconsciously identified the real problem. The resolutions were being made by his conscious ego, but they were being sabotaged by his shadow self. Jung observed Herr M's persona carefully. The man presented himself as supremely controlled, rational, and optimistic. He wore expensive suits, spoke in measured tones, and maintained perfect posture. But Jung detected what he called the tremor beneath the mask, micro-expressions of rage, shame, and desperation that flickered across Herr M's face whenever he discussed his failures. The persona, Jung wrote in his notes, is compensating for an enormous shadow it refuses to acknowledge. Over 6 months of analysis, Jung discovered that Herr M's drinking represented his repressed need for spontaneity and pleasure in a life dominated by rigid performance. His exercise resolutions masked a deeper terror of aging and death that he had never consciously confronted. His marriage wasn't failing because of lack of effort. It was suffocating under the weight of his persona's desperate need to appear perfect. But Jung discovered something even more profound. Herr M didn't actually want to change. What he wanted was to maintain his persona's illusion of control. The annual ritual of making resolutions allowed him to believe he was actively working on himself while ensuring that nothing fundamental would ever transform. Jung identified what he called persona-driven resolutions, promises made by the social mask rather than by the authentic self. These resolutions fail because they emerge from ego consciousness alone, completely disconnected from the unconscious psyche where real motivation and behavioral patterns live. He wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." When we make resolutions, we're not asking, "What does my whole psyche need to become integrated?" We're asking, "What will make me look better to myself and others?" This is the first type of doomed resolution. Type 1 is what Jung called the perfection resolution. These are promises designed to eliminate perceived flaws and present an idealized version of the self to the world. I will lose 30 pounds. I will become a morning person. I will stop being anxious. Jung observed that these resolutions attempt to destroy aspects of the shadow rather than integrate them. He wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort." A patient once told Jung she had resolved to eliminate all negative thoughts. Jung responded, "You're not trying to transform yourself, you're trying to amputate half your psyche." Type 2 is the compensation resolution. These are unconscious attempts to balance what Jung called one-sided conscious development. A workaholic resolves to spend more time with family, but this resolution fails because it doesn't address the underlying complex driving the work addiction. A chronically passive person resolves to be more assertive, but this fails because assertiveness has been relegated entirely to the shadow and cannot be accessed through conscious willpower alone. Jung wrote in Psychology and Religion, "Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." These resolutions fail because they're trying to import qualities from the shadow without doing the actual integration work. Type 3 is what Jung called the collective resolution. These are promises we make not because our psyche needs them, but because society demands them. I will be more productive, I will be more successful, I will fit in better. Jung observed that these resolutions represent maximum adaptation to society and minimum adaptation to individuality. He wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough, a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual." When you make a resolution based on what you think you should want rather than what your whole psyche actually needs, you guarantee failure, because the unconscious will always rebel against goals that serve the persona at the expense of the self. Now you can understand why Jung considered this discovery dangerous. But the real terror begins when you realize what happens when the persona keeps making resolutions while the shadow keeps sabotaging them. Danger. 1. Jung called this the inflation-deflation cycle. Every time you make a resolution, your ego inflates with the fantasy of transformation. You imagine the idealized future version of yourself and momentarily believe you can force yourself to become that person through willpower alone. But Jung observed that this inflation is psychologically unstable. He wrote, "Inflation occurs when the ego identifies excessively with something beyond its true capacity. When the resolution inevitably fails, the ego doesn't just return to baseline, it deflates into depression, shame, and self-loathing." Herr M described this to Jung. "Every February, I hate myself more than I did the previous year. The resolutions are making me worse, not better." Jung documented that patients caught in this cycle often develop what he called chronic ego weakness, a permanent state where the conscious personality knows it cannot trust itself. The warning: each failed resolution doesn't just waste time, it actively damages your psychological structure. Danger. 2. The shadow grows stronger. Jung made a disturbing observation in his clinical work. Every time a patient made a resolution without addressing their shadow, the shadow didn't remain static, it intensified. He wrote, "If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected." When you resolve to stop drinking but refuse to acknowledge the psychological needs that drinking fulfills, those needs don't disappear. They burrow deeper into the unconscious and manifest in increasingly destructive ways. Jung documented cases where patients who successfully forced behavioral change through willpower alone experienced complete psychological breakdowns within 2 years. The alcoholic who quit through sheer determination developed a gambling addiction. The overeater who starved themselves became suicidal. Jung's warning was clear. Forced conscious change without shadow integration creates monsters in the unconscious. Danger. 3. Persona imprisonment. This is what Jung feared most. When someone spends years making and breaking resolutions, they eventually construct what he called a prison of failed intentions. The persona becomes defined entirely by what it cannot accomplish. Jung wrote to a colleague in 1933, "I have seen patients who have made the same resolution for 20 consecutive years. They are no longer trying to change. They are performing a ritual of self-punishment. These individuals become trapped in an identity built on failure, and paradoxically, this identity becomes comfortable. The annual resolution serves as proof that they're trying, which allows them to avoid the genuinely terrifying work of transformation." Jung observed, "The persona prevents us from what I consider the most important task in our lives, the process of individuation." So if conscious resolutions don't work, what does? Jung spent 4 decades developing what he called the integration method, a process that doesn't fight the shadow but dialogues with it. Phase 1, shadow recognition. Jung insisted that transformation begins not with deciding what you want to become, but with acknowledging what you actually are. He would ask patients, What behavior are you trying to change? Then, what need does this behavior fulfill? Herr M wanted to stop drinking. Jung asked him to spend 30 days not trying to stop, but simply observing what triggered his drinking and what relief it provided. This is what Jung called making the unconscious conscious. The practice involves keeping a shadow journal where you document not your resolutions but your actual behaviors and the psychological truths they reveal. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The manifestation of successful phase 1? You stop seeing your unwanted behaviors as moral failures and start seeing them as symptoms of unintegrated psychic material. Phase 2, negotiation with the shadow. Jung developed a technique he called active imagination, a method of conscious dialogue with unconscious contents. Instead of resolving to eliminate the behavior, you ask the shadow what it needs. Jung instructed Herr M to personify his drinking compulsion as a separate entity and interview it. The shadow figure revealed it was trying to protect Herr M from the crushing anxiety of his persona's perfectionism. Once this was conscious, transformation became possible, not through elimination, but through finding healthier ways to meet the same need. Jung wrote, "The shadow has to have its place of legitimate expression somehow, sometime, somewhere." The practice involves sitting quietly, visualizing the aspect of yourself that sabotages your resolutions, and asking it directly, "What are you trying to protect me from?" The manifestation. Your self-sabotage decreases not because you've overpowered it, but because you've addressed its underlying cause. Phase 3, individuation through integration. This is Jung's ultimate solution. Instead of making resolutions based on who you think you should be, you allow your whole psyche, conscious and unconscious, persona and shadow to participate in defining your authentic path. Jung wrote, "The aim of individuation is nothing less than to divest the self of the false wrappings of the persona on the one hand and of the suggestive power of primordial images on the other." The practice involves replacing resolutions with what Jung called conscious suffering, the deliberate choice to confront the psychological material you've been avoiding. If you're addicted to work, you don't resolve to work less. You sit with the terror that emerges when you stop working and discover what that terror is actually about. The manifestation of successful integration? Your life changes not because you forced it to, but because you're finally living from the self rather than the persona. Phase 4, the continuous process. Jung emphasized that individuation isn't a one-time event, but a lifelong journey. He wrote, "The negotiation with one's shadow is a lifelong process as part of our self-education." After phase 3, the work becomes maintaining conscious relationship with the shadow, checking new desires and goals against the question, is this my persona performing, or is this my self expressing its authentic need? The practice? Every time you feel the urge to make a resolution, pause and ask, what am I running from? What am I refusing to feel? Only when you've answered these questions honestly do you have the psychological foundation for real transformation. Jung documented what happened when patients followed this method instead of making traditional resolutions. Example 1 is a cautionary tale. Jung treated a patient in 1931, a successful surgeon who had resolved every year for a decade to be less arrogant. The man attended seminars on humility, practiced meditation, and monitored his speech, yet his arrogance only increased. Under Jung's analysis, they discovered the arrogance was compensating for a childhood wound where the patient's father had constantly criticized him. The persona's arrogance was the shadow's attempt to protect him from ever feeling that inadequacy again. When Jung suggested he stop trying to eliminate the arrogance and instead thank it for protecting him while gently introducing alternative coping mechanisms, the patient was horrified. "You're telling me to accept my worst quality?" He rejected Jung's method and continued his resolution-based approach. Within 3 years, his arrogance had destroyed his marriage and his career. Jung wrote in his notes, he chose the comfort of familiar failure over the terror of transformation. Example 2 is the success story. In 1935, Jung worked with a woman who had resolved annually to overcome her depression. Through shadow work, they discovered her depression was the psyche's rebellion against a life lived entirely according to others' expectations. She wasn't supposed to cure the depression, she was supposed to listen to it. Jung guided her through a process where instead of fighting the depression, she asked it what it wanted her to know. The depression revealed that her entire career, marriage, and social circle were expressions of her persona rather than her authentic self. Over 2 years, she methodically reconstructed her life based on genuine psychological needs rather than social performance. Jung documented, the depression lifted not because she defeated it, but because she understood it. What appeared to be pathology was actually the self's desperate attempt to be heard. Jung's own journey validates this. In 1913, Jung experienced what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a psychological breakdown that lasted 3 years. His persona, built on his reputation as Freud's protege and a successful psychiatrist, had become a prison. When the relationship fractured, Jung's identity collapsed. But instead of making resolutions to rebuild his persona, Jung did something radical. He descended into his shadow. He dialogued with unconscious figures through active imagination, recorded his visions and dreams, and allowed himself to be temporarily overwhelmed by material he didn't understand. His colleagues thought he was having a psychotic break. But Jung emerged from this darkness with the theoretical framework that would define his life's work: the collective unconscious, archetypes, and individuation. He wrote, "The years when I pursued my inner images were the most important of my life. Everything else derived from them." Jung learned that transformation doesn't come from the persona's resolutions, but from the ego's surrender to the self's deeper wisdom. Let me bring this back to Herr M, the businessman we met at the beginning. After 18 months of analysis with Jung, Herr M stopped making resolutions entirely. Instead, he began what Jung called the continuous conversation with the unconscious. He stopped trying to eliminate his drinking and started understanding what his psyche was trying to tell him through the compulsion. He discovered that his persona's obsession with success was suffocating his shadow's need for creative expression and authentic connection. Slowly, he restructured his life, not through willpower, but through psychological honesty. He reduced his work hours not because he resolved to, but because the anxiety driving his workaholism had been addressed. He stopped drinking not because he forced abstinence, but because alcohol was no longer necessary once he found healthier ways to access spontaneity and pleasure. Jung documented, Herr M did not transform through strength of will, he transformed through strength of consciousness. 5 years after ending their work together, Herr M wrote to Jung, "I don't make resolutions anymore, but somehow I'm becoming the person I always needed to be. Your failed New Year resolutions aren't a character defect. They're a message from your shadow, desperately trying to tell you that the person making the resolution isn't your real self, it's the mask. And the mask cannot transform you, because transformation requires confronting what lies beneath the mask." Jung discovered that lasting change happens not when the persona resolves to improve, but when the ego finally becomes brave enough to listen to what the shadow has been screaming for years. Your addiction, your procrastination, your self-sabotage, these aren't obstacles to transformation. They're the doorway. But you have to be willing to walk through it. If this resonated with you, if you recognize yourself in Jung's patience caught between the persona's promises and the shadow's rebellion, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel. We're building a community of people brave enough to stop performing transformation and start living it. Drop a comment about the resolution you've made and broken most often in your life.